This story is fiction. The names, voices, and events you'll hear are not drawn from reality. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events, is coincidental. What follows exists only in story.
What's your emergency?
There's a fire. My building's on fire. It's apartment 3A, Brookfield Apartments. God, Jesus, it's bad.
Okay, sir, I need you to stay calm. Are you inside the building?
No, I got out. I was inside, but I'm out now. There's still people in there. 2 in my apartment, others inside. God.
You're doing great. Help is already on the way. You said apartment 3A. There are 2 people still inside that unit. Can you tell me their names?
Mark Alston, Elizabeth Wynn. I don't know. My arm's fucked. I slammed it. Please, just send someone. The hallway. There's so much smoke. I couldn't see. I tried to pull her. She wouldn't move. Mark was there. I think there was so much blood. I don't know what happened. Just please.
Help is on the way. Stay on the line if you can.
Okay.
The night of July 12, 2022 began like any other summer night. By midnight, it was a tragedy. 2 young people dead, 1 barely alive. That panicked voice you just heard was James Brightman, calling for help as his home burned behind him. I'm Ross Ford. I'm a journalist who lives and works in Fairview. I was there that night. I live a few blocks away from the Brookfield Apartments. I remember seeing an orange glow on the horizon, smelling smoke through my open window. By the time I heard the sirens wail, I was already grabbing my camera and my keys. It wasn't duty that dragged me out the door. It was proximity, the shock of something so horrible happening so close to home. I was off duty, but there I was on the sidewalk, alongside my neighbors, watching flames claw out of the building's 3rd-floor windows. I just needed to know what happened and why. In the days that followed, I wrote up the story for our local paper. At the time, I had no reason to doubt the story we all heard. It was so clear, so awful, and also so simple. I wasn't working on some investigative mystery, I was reporting a tragedy. At least that's how I saw it then. But this podcast is about the questions I started asking myself when the timeline just didn't line up. This is Burn Pattern, Episode 1, Ignition Point. At first, the police and the local press told a very straightforward story. It looked like a simple crime of passion. Jealousy gone wild.
Police confirm that 2 bodies were found inside the unit. 1 near the window, 1 closer to the hallway door. The 3rd roommate, identified as James Brightman, was found in a state of shock outside.
Investigators say something snapped in James's roommate Mark Alston that night. Mark was a childhood friend of James. Rumor was he developed unrequited feelings for James's girlfriend, Elizabeth Wynn. At about 11:43 p.m. in apartment 3A, Mark supposedly attacked Elizabeth in a jealous rage, stabbing her several times, before setting fire to the place out of a final, twisted desperation. Mark and Elizabeth both died that night. James ran from the apartment injured, but alive. He was the only survivor. The evidence appeared to confirm the story. Firefighters discovered traces of accelerant in several locations inside the apartment, in the hall, on the living room curtains, etc., indicating someone had intentionally set the blaze. Later, investigators would find traces of accelerant on the sole of Mark's shoe. Police also found a crumpled, singed note in Mark's pocket, reading, "I'm sorry. I never meant to ruin it." To anyone, that sounded like a note of regret. Perhaps even a suicide note, written by someone who had just committed an unforgivable crime. James's statements to police added more details to this narrative. He described a typical evening that spiraled into a horrific nightmare, with Mark cast as the aggressor, and James as a panicked would-be hero trying to save the day. In a recorded interview given to police just hours after the fire, James explained what happened in his apartment.
I yelled. I held her. Tried to get her out of there. I slipped, slammed my arm into the door frame. There was smoke, thick, fast. The drapes were already burning. I grabbed her arm, tried to pull her out, but she wasn't moving. The flames were too fast. I ran. I called 911 right away. I think it was before the alarm went off.
Every detail of James's account aligned with the official story. Mark attacking Elizabeth, the apartment rapidly filling with smoke and fire, James injuring his arm while trying to save her, and barely escaping with his life. James's injuries themselves supported this version of events. He had second-degree burns on his hands and the left side of his face, along with a hairline fracture in his right forearm from hitting the doorframe while fleeing. He was treated at a local hospital.
James Brightman was released from Mercy General the next afternoon. He suffered burns on his hands and face, as well as a small fracture to his right forearm.
Officially, James Brightman was more than innocent. He was a victim. He was a survivor. He had tried to save Elizabeth and almost died trying. James was cleared by police in a public statement. He was the primary witness, not a suspect. Mark Alston was, by default, an accused murderer and arsonist. A boy whose jealousy and mental instability had made him kill his friend's girlfriend and himself. Officially, to the police and the public, the case was closed. The narrative was messy for those involved, but it provided at least a grim sort of closure for the community at large. 2 people were dead. 1 had been spared. A killer was dead and would not stand trial. For the next few weeks, the news broadcasts and the evening newscasts, the papers delivered to your doorstep, they all told the same story. Jealousy, murder, fire. Domestic tragedy with a sadly simple explanation. A few days after the fire, the residents of Brookfield Apartments and the friends of the victims met outside the building for a candlelight vigil. By that point, the fire crews and the crime scene tape had been removed, but the blackened window frames of Unit 3A still towered above us, a grotesque reminder of what had happened. The summer air was still faintly redolent of smoke that night, the acrid taste of burning still at the back of your throat. Dozens of small candles were lit on the sidewalk, their wax dripping and melting on the concrete. The neighbors of the Brookfield Apartments stood in a dark, sad semicircle in front of the building, murmuring or silent. In that pregnant silence, you could hear every sniffle, every shuffle of feet. Silence was almost an entity of its own that night, not merely the absence of noise, but a tangible reminder of how much had been taken away. I remember the flicker of candlelight on James Brightman's face as he stepped up to speak to the group. There was a bandage on his forearm, burned scars on his cheek, healed but still visible in the candlelight. James had red, hollow eyes. It looked like he'd been crying. When he talked about Elizabeth, he spoke softly, almost whispered, and people crowded closer to listen.
She had this way of making everyone feel seen, even on the bad days.
He paused, swallowing hard. A friend beside him put a hand on his back as he continued.
She was the kind of person who didn't need the room to be quiet to make you feel heard. She could cut through the noise, make you feel like you mattered.
His voice washed over us in the wavering dark. A few heads murmured in assent. Many were quietly sobbing. My own throat tightened. Elizabeth Wynne was dead. Someone I only knew in a photograph by that point. But in that moment, she was tangible, achingly familiar to all who listened. We were all envisioning her as James described her, caring, attentive, the sort of person who could make anyone feel less alone. Neighbors and friends took turns leaving flowers, cards, and other small offerings at the apartment steps that had been singed in the fire. The concrete was blackened and charred, and the pristine whiteness of the fresh roses seemed almost more than I could bear. I remember an elderly woman, a neighbor from a few doors down, crouching on the ground, a single red rose in her hands as she placed it at the building's front door. In a quavering yet determined voice, she spoke.
I'm placing this rose here so that James knows that he's not alone, that we're all here with him.
James stood a few steps behind her, arms wrapped tightly around himself. He nodded, smiled, and uttered a nice thank you to everyone. People were hugging in the crowd. Some of Mark's and Elizabeth's friends were there, and they hugged James as one of their own. In that ring of candlelight, the neighborhood tightened its ranks around the survivor. Whatever ambiguity or frustration or judgment any of us felt on some level, that night we put it aside in the name of humanity. It was the kind of night that makes even a senseless tragedy feel, for a while, a little less so. And still, I remember watching James as the vigil drew to a close. He was at the edge of the crowd, holding one of the candles. His voice was turned away from the others, his eyes fixed on the darkened doorway of his former home. People spoke to him, low and kind. "Take care, James. We're here for you." He nodded in response, but he seemed, distant. His eyes were focused, but in that look there was something unreadable, inscrutable. In that moment, he seemed removed from everything around him. Not unmoved, not suspicious, nothing so concrete as that, just removed. I shrugged it off at the time. Who could blame him? The man had lost 2 close friends and nearly his own life. Of course he'd be numb, shaken, on autopilot. I told myself this was just the hollow shell of grief talking. And maybe it was. The vigil ended with a long moment of silence, punctuated only by the soft sputter of candle wicks in the breeze. We bowed our heads, closed our eyes. In that silence, I could almost pretend that the world stopped with us, holding its breath in mourning for Elizabeth and Mark. When we finally dispersed into the warm summer night, I think many of us believed we'd borne witness to the end of the story, a community saying goodbye, trying to heal. I know I believed that, but I was wrong. For a while, I tried to let it go. I returned to my normal routine, telling myself there was nothing more to do here. The authorities had their man, tragic as that outcome was. The community had mourned and tried to heal, and life was meant to go on. But I couldn't shake this one nagging detail. It was a tiny inconsistency in an avalanche of evidence, something almost no one seemed to have noticed or cared about. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It had to do with time. More specifically, the timeline of that night. The fire, the 911 call, and what James said. According to the official incident reports and the fire department logs, the building's alarm system was first triggered by a heat detector at 11:42 on July 12th. That alarm system would have sent out an automatic alert to the fire department nearly instantly. Yet James's 911 call, the panicked call you heard at the start of this episode, that wasn't logged until 11:45 p.m. 3 minutes, give or take a few seconds. 3 minutes. On paper, it sounds like nothing. 3 minutes is barely any time at all. Just the length of a pop song. But in a fire, 3 minutes is a lifetime. In a rapidly spreading blaze, 3 minutes could be the difference between pulling someone out and being too late. Between a room full of smoke and a room fully ablaze. And it bothered me, because in every retelling, James has consistently maintained that he called for help as soon as possible. In every single interview, James has never wavered on that point. James says he did the only thing he could, and he did it as soon as humanly possible. You heard the police interview, where he said, "I think it was even before the alarm went off." Likewise, in a televised interview with the local news, James repeated the detail almost word for word.
Everything happened so fast. I don't even remember the alarm. I just ran. I called as soon as I could.
Those are James Brightman's own words. But the dispatch logs tell a different story. The fire alarm's alert was received at 11:42, and James's call was answered at 11:45. If the alarm was ringing and automatically notifying emergency services, why would James take 3 additional minutes to call? Now, 3 minutes could be a lot of things. Chaos, confusion, sheer panic. James had just been through something utterly horrific. He says he saw his 2 closest friends bleeding and burning. He was struck in the arm. He was choking on smoke. Who's to say how trauma might delay someone's actions or distort their memory? Maybe he was disoriented. Maybe it really did feel instantaneous, and in reality a few minutes slipped by. The mind does strange things under extreme stress. I wasn't about to declare someone a liar, or worse, over a 3-minute gap. But I also couldn't let it go. I remember poring over the fire department's report, the timeline of events, and that single discrepancy just stuck in my mind like a splinter. James said he called right away, but the logs say otherwise. It was the first sign, the first tiny crack in the neatly constructed facade of the official story. And it made me uneasy. Was it just confusion? Trauma warping memory? Maybe. But it was the first moment that made me stop and look closer. On paper, this should have been the entire story. A tragic accident. A closed case. I thought so too. For weeks. I wrote the same story everyone else did and went to bed thinking we knew the answers. Mark Alston had lost control and ended 2 lives, his own among them, in a flash of rage. Elizabeth Wynne was the beloved victim of a senseless act of violence. James Brightman was a traumatized victim who did all he could in a no-win situation. That's what everyone thought. That's what I thought. Until one small inconsistency pried open the door, just a little bit. I never intended to tear anyone's life or reputation apart, but I also couldn't ignore the nagging sensation that something didn't add up, even if I couldn't figure out what. I kept thinking about James's 911 call, replaying it in my head. For weeks, I told myself that I was being obsessive. What could 3 minutes possibly mean in the bigger picture? James had lived, and his friends had not. The fact was set in stone. Mark was dead, and would never be able to explain himself. No one was going to solve this case because the police were certainly not looking any further. And yet here I was, on late nights at home, alone in the living room, listening to the recording of that 911 call again and again and again. In the silence of my home, James's words took on new gravity. There's one part in particular that I kept coming back to.
I tried to pull her. There was so much blood.
In light of the horrific events, I honestly don't think I ever truly heard those words. I was so riveted by the horror of what I was seeing, what was happening, that I don't think I was really listening. But once I had it on tape, I couldn't unhear it. I tried to pull her. There was so much blood. Simple, terrible lines, ones that provide as many questions as they do answers. Why hadn't James been able to pull Elizabeth out of the house? Had he really screamed for help as soon as he thought he had? Little details. Little discrepancies. I sat alone, replaying the tape, and the hairs on the back of my neck rose. It had nothing to do with the October wind blowing through my window. I didn't know it then, but I was on the precipice of something deeper and more disturbing than a simple domestic tragedy. I was beginning to understand that the official story, as clean and concise as it was, may have masked as much as it had divulged. I was beginning to question. In that small way, questions worm their way into your brain at 2 a.m. But I still had no answers, only questions, and I wasn't ready to ask them. Not yet. I opened a new notebook and wrote down one question. I circled it and I circled it again. What happened in those missing 3 minutes? And that was what set everything in motion. A 3-minute gap. A timing that didn't add up. I didn't know what that question was going to lead me to, not at the time. If I had, maybe I would have let it go. Maybe I would have left the tragedy of apartment 3A alone and let everyone else continue healing in peace. But I didn't let it go. I couldn't, because every time I closed my eyes, I saw those candles flickering in front of a blackened building. And I heard James's voice on that tape begging. I tried to pull her. I don't know what happened. Please. Later, I'd listen to the recordings again, and I would hear something that I hadn't the first time. And once I heard it, there was no turning back. This is Burn Pattern. Stay tuned.